A special Queen's Park committee has spent the past few months digging into the financial record of the previous provincial government, led by Premier Kathleen Wynne. The Financial Transparency Committee has been trying to get to the bottom of how the Liberals lowered electricity prices by asking Ontario Power Generation to borrow billions to subsidize hydro rates. That way, the expenditures would be on OPG's books and not on the government's. Here's how Premier Doug Ford characterized it 3 months ago.
This was quite possibly the worst political cover-up in Ontario's history. Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals lied to all of us, and we all know that if you lie on your taxes, if you lie on your mortgage, if you lie on your car loan, there are consequences. You don't just get to walk away. A lot of the Liberals got rich, really, really rich, under Kathleen Wynne and off the backs of the taxpayers of Ontario. We're going to put forward a motion to strike a select committee. This committee will have the power to call witnesses, to compel documents, to gather evidence. We expect that this committee will leave no stone unturned.
Okay, the hearings are over. The committee is now writing its report, so let's check in with Ross Romano. He is the PC MPP for Sault Ste. Marie and a member of the Special Legislative Committee. Sandy Shaw, NDP MPP from Hamilton West and Ancaster Dundas, and also a member of the Special Committee. Mitzi Hunter, Liberal MPP for Scarborough-Guildwood. Mike Schreiner, MPP for Guelph and leader of the Green Party of Ontario. And Robert Benzie is here. He's the Queen's Park Bureau Chief of the Toronto Star, and we're happy to welcome everybody around our table, including you and Ross Romano for the first time. Nice to have you here.
Good to be here.
Let's just set the table here, if we can. Ross, off the top. What was the mandate of this committee?
Well, as you are well aware, last year the Liberal government, then Liberal government, indicated in the budget that our deficit in Ontario was going to be $6.7 billion. The year prior to that, they indicated that we in fact had a very small surplus of about $300 million. The purpose of our committee was to find out what the deficit really was, because obviously we learned at the tail end of last year through the FAO and the Auditor General that the deficit was actually much worse than what we were led to believe over the course of the last two Liberal government's budgets. And we learned through the Commission of Inquiry that the deficit was in fact $15 billion. And so when you have that big of a disparity of $8.3 billion, obviously it was something that we saw through the results of the election that the people of Ontario really wanted answers. We had a lot of questions, and so the purpose or the mandate, if you will, of the committee was really just to find out the truth. What were the true state of the finances in Ontario?
Okay, Sandy Shaw, how effective do you think the committee was at trying to get to the bottom of that, of the Fair Hydro Plan, of all of the stuff that went into those financial decisions?
The committee had potential to be very effective. I would say the clip that you showed earlier of the Premier set the stage for a committee that really wasn't looking to get to the truth of the matter, that there was a really political grandstaging. So at the committee, you know, we had every hope that we would be able to compel witnesses that would get to the bottom of it, that we'd be able to ask all the questions that we thought were relevant. And what we ended up seeing was more really of the same, so sort of the idea that this was all about trying to vilify the former government, and not really a meaningful or serious attempt to get to the bottom of it, as they said. And if that were the case, you know, we would have been able to compel witnesses like we wanted, our side, the New Democrats wanted to subpoena or to have testimony from the former Hydro One, Mayo Schmidt, which would have been important testimony, given that Hydro One was at the center of that. We had the former controller, provincial controller.
We're going to get to this.
Okay?
Yeah, we'll get to this.
So there was a lot of blocking of witnesses and blocking of important questions. So at the end of the day, a committee that could have been significant and who could have got to the bottom of some of these irregularities really was mired in just political theater.
Mitzi Hunter, what was your view on how well it did?
Well, I think that this committee, as Sandy has said, is really all about the government's show. I think it's a distraction, frankly, from the real issues that are affecting Ontarians, which are the deep, deep cuts that are affecting programs that people care about, like education. The government just announced on Friday a $25 million cut to education. I have people that are reaching out to me in despair because these programs, these after-school programs, were literally saving kids' lives. And yet this government sees it fit to cut those programs. So it's not about getting at the truth. We know that because Cindy was not allowed to appear at the committee. In fact, she took an extraordinary step to write her submission, and instead it's a distraction.
We should just
It's also
explain.
a
It's Cindy Vigneault, the former controller.
Yeah, the former controller, number one in her class. We went out and recruited her in as our controller here in Ontario, and she stood firm on a disagreement with the numbers and did not sign off on the books.
Let me get Mike Schreiner in on this point. The Liberals did not have a seat at the table on this committee because they're not an officially constituted party, and you didn't either because you're not an officially constituted party. You're in the legislature, but not with enough seats. In your view, did that hamstring the ability of the committee to get to the bottom of whatever it wanted to get to the bottom of?
Well, it's still unclear what the committee wanted to get to the bottom of. So to me, it just seems like a waste of time and money. It was trying to tell us what the Auditor General and the Financial Accountability Officer are already paid to tell us what to do. As a matter of fact, our party, we actually use the AG and FAO numbers in our costed platform because we knew the deficit was higher before the election was even called. So I don't know why we needed to have a committee to tell us that. And now we have the latest FAO report that just came out last week saying that essentially the new government now is playing political games with the books and overstating the budget deficit. So I think what the people of Ontario are sick and tired of are these kinds of political games with the province's finances. What we really need to do is listen to the Auditor General and the Financial Accountability Officer. They're the independent officers who can tell us the real story.
Well, I also think we need to listen to the provincial controller, who her and her team had oversight of the accounting and would monitor that for years. Why not ask them to come to committee and get to those answers?
Well, the person who knows the answer to that is sitting beside you. So let's ask the question. Why was the controller not permitted to testify?
Well, I want to first off state that prior to coming into a political career, I was in the legal profession. I did trial work for a number of years as a litigator. I have never seen in all of my years of litigation a witness that was so encouraged and motivated to come testify before any type of a group. And that caused some serious concerns, at least from my perspective, with respect to the level of objectivity that Ms. Vigneault was going to be able to bring to the committee, that she would be able to attend and provide unbiased, objective evidence before the committee. And that was very concerning from at least my perspective. But let's put that aside for a moment and assume that there wasn't going to be an issue with her objectivity. At the end of the day, what she was going to come to this committee to testify about was how the accounting practices took place with respect to specifically the Fair Hydro Plan. The difficulty I have with that is simply a question of relevance. We had already heard from numerous other accounting experts who explained the how. The question from our perspective and from the Ontario voters' perspectives, and the whole reason why we were here, is not how, it was why. Why did they do it? And we had that information. So the committee was supposed to conclude by the time frame that it did conclude, December 13th. In fact, we were supposed to have a report tendered. We could continue to call experts, numerous experts in accounting. We could do that for months on end. At some point in time, you have to say, what is the material relevance of that particular witness?
Let me get Rob Benzie. You're here today because you reported on the deliberations of the committee. You reported on the committee hearings. You did a story on this. In your view, based on your reporting, what would Cindy Vigneault, the controller who was involved in the Fair Hydro Plan, what would she have testified to had she been allowed to?
Well, she did a 12-page submission that we obtained and that has gone to the committee. I don't know if that'll be part of the report writing that's happening this week. But Cindy Vigneault resigned from the government on September 27th because she refused to sign off on the public accounts. She's not a Liberal, she's a bureaucrat, and she's only been a bureaucrat for 2 years. Before that, she was a partner with Deloitte. And unlike me and unlike anyone at this table and unlike the Auditor General, Cindy is actually a pension accounting expert. It's a pretty small area of expertise, I know. And in her submission, she notes that she didn't sign off on the books because she didn't agree with the way that the new government is accounting for the jointly held pension assets. There are about $11 billion in teachers' assets and OPSU pension fund assets that the government co-sponsors. The previous Liberal government, perhaps through some trickery, overstated how much those were worth on the bottom line. The Auditor General used to count those. Every Auditor General from 2002 till Bonnie Lisk changed her tune in 2015, used to account for them. Cindy Vino said as of 2016 that they were worth X number of billions on the bottom line, and that's what the Liberal government of the day said the deficit was 6.7 billion, and the Auditor General said that the deficit was around 11 billion. So it's an accounting thing. This is not a political scandal the way that the Premier suggested. It's an accounting dispute.
Well, I do want to put that quote to you because we heard the Premier off the top say a lot of Liberals got rich, really, really rich under Kathleen Wynne and off the backs of the taxpayers of Ontario. That's what he said. There's now been 3 months of committee hearings. Do we know whether that's true?
Well, no, well, we don't know that that's true. And what we've said, not to Ross so much, but to the ministers involved, we've said, great. If this is a crime, who is calling the police? And they haven't called the police.
Exactly.
And remember, the Tories were not shy about calling the police on the gas plants debacle when the Liberals were in power and on other Liberal scandals. They haven't called the police on this one because no crime has been committed. It's an accounting dispute.
Ross, would you agree that no crime's been committed here and this was a bit of political overreach?
I don't think it was political overreach. I look back to, again, we had a government, former government that was reduced to 7 seats in the House. The people of Ontario spoke loud and clear in the election. They did not trust the former government. They did not trust the accounting. They did not trust the numbers. We had a deficit that we were told was 6.7 billion last year. It turns out that it was in excess of 12 to 15 billion dollars.
But the suggestion is that there was criminal malfeasance involved here.
Well,
that was the very strong suggestion. Is that the case?
I can certainly tell you that we know who didn't get rich, and it's the ratepayers and the taxpayers of Ontario. They certainly did not get rich off this former government. They certainly had a lot of questions, and this committee ultimately had the unanimous approval of everyone in the House. Everyone who attended on that day to vote voted in favor of the motion to create this committee with the mandate that we had.
Okay. Have you seen criminal malfeasance as a result of your
Absolutely
investigation?
not. And that is a question that I put to almost every witness, specifically the idea that the Liberals got rich off of this. I mean, those are high accusations that come from the Premier, and that set the tone, as I said earlier, for the committee. So I wanted to clear the air with each witness. Let's get the elephant in the room out, and were people enriched by this? And not one single witness agreed that that was the case. And so what I'm saying is that this speaks to the idea that this was this a really genuine and meaningful effort to understand what had happened? There is no doubt that the Liberals, the way that they borrowed money, that scheme as it's been called, was unpopular with the electorate. I mean, they were reduced to 7 seats. It was unpopular. It was a political partisan strategy that failed miserably. But this government, by trying to say that it was political, that it was beyond political, that it was in fact criminal, sets the tone for the kind of dialogue that we're having, not only in this committee, but the kind of dialogue that we're having in the House. I mean, we have, people of Ontario have very serious concerns about continuing to be, that their hydro continues to be unaffordable. We have the people that are concerned about losing their jobs. We have what's happened in Oshawa. There's people that are still waiting in hallways in terms of the health care that they're receiving. And so this committee has spent a lot of time, a lot of energy trying to get to the bottom of something that was not, wasn't criminal. And in fact, the way that witnesses have been blocked and questions have been overruled by the majority on the committee has prevented us from actually getting to some issues of substance.
Can I go to Mitzi Hunter on this? When she was Premier, Kathleen Wynne, at least once, maybe Rob will help me with my memory here, maybe even twice, sued or threatened to sue members of the opposition whom she believed libeled her. Now, the lawyers eventually made it all go away, and they figured out some, this is not a legal term, but some weasel words to make everybody happy. But the bottom line is, when she felt she was libeled, she sued. We've already seemed to have discovered here that there's been no criminal malfeasance. There have been some pretty strong allegations from the Premier. Do you know whether you or the former Premier or the Liberal caucus intends to sue the Premier for his remarks?
It's not something that we've talked about, Steve, but I want to go back to the why that Ross has surfaced here, because in my view, if you really care about the why, you would have called Cindy Vino. to hear what
exactly.
she has to say, because she knows the most about the province's books. And, you know, I want to read from her statement, because I think it's important that we give light to this. And she says that the failure of the committee to meet with the provincial controller raises a significant concern regarding the credibility of the committee's work. She staked
Because
her,
she was hip deep in the Fair Hydro plan.
she staked her reputation on this in terms of, you know, her understanding of accounting principles, both here in Canada, the United States, and around the world. And she says, you know, I disagree with the government's interpretation of this, and she resigned.
Ross, do you think it affects the credibility of whatever outcome this committee will have because she was not called?
No, not at all. In fact, Steve, and I stand by this, this isn't a question of how the Fair Hydro Plan was created. We know how it was created. We know what we know about rate-regulated accounting. It hadn't been used in the province. It does not follow proper public sector accounting standards. We know all those things. The issue is not how, it's why. And we heard from the highest ranking members of the formal government, including the former Premier herself, the Minister of Energy. We heard from the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Energy. We heard from the Deputy Ministers to all of the most significant ministers, that being the Minister of Energy, Minister of Finance, the Treasury Board, as well as the Premiers herself. And we heard the same thing all along. The question was why? Why did they do it? And what we did learn through various emails and documents, and Ms. Shaw can very well agree to this, as she was in the room throughout this was done for political purposes. You can borrow money to reduce the rates the way they chose to do, and I know, Ms. Hunter, you were present in all of those meetings, cabinet meetings, that is a political decision. That's fine. The question is, why hide the deficit? Why hide the true cost? That is the cover-up. That's the issue. That is the real crux
So
of the
come
issue.
on, wait a
Mike
second here.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
so we
correct.
all knew that
Exactly.
well before this committee was ever formed. I mean,
But where was the
even
proof of
even
it?
the current finance minister, when he was in opposition, railed against this plan, and rightfully so, said it was a politically motivated plan. The accounting was set up because the Liberals were dealing with two challenges. One is rising hydro rates, which they wanted to take care of, and they also wanted to fulfill their commitment to balance the deficit, the books. So that's why they came up with this. We all knew that ahead of time. We didn't need a committee to tell us that. What I would ask the government is this Fair Hydro Plan was a bad policy decision.
What was bad about it?
Well, it ballooned the deficit by $4 billion a year. The FAO says it's going to cost anywhere between $40 and $90 billion.
Just so everybody
And
understands here, hang on, because
Yes.
there's a lot of inside baseball. It costs more for Ontario Power Generation to borrow money to help subsidize rates than it would the government of Ontario.
That's right. That's
and
right.
therefore, that's $4 billion more
more than
electricity
they
prices
needed to
will
pay.
cost.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
But
then
it keeps the money off the
But it
government's
keeps
books.
the money off the government's books.
So that's why they did it.
That's why they did it. And, you know, it was a politically motivated decision, but there's nothing illegal about it. I think it was a bad decision, and they should be held politically accountable for it. But we all knew that before the committee ever even did any investigation.
I think if you look at this, and this came out in the committee as well, the gas plant scandal was certainly something that received a great deal of attention. That was a $1 billion cost to the taxpayers of Ontario. This was $4 billion just so they could conceal the true state of the deficit, just so they could hide that from Ontario taxpayers. That's 4 gas plant scandals in one. Let's put things into perspective. What I don't agree with is this notion that somehow everybody just knew. What we heard last year as members of the House, as people who are very actively involved in this in politics, we can appreciate what had occurred, but there was no proof. There was nothing to be able to go to the taxpayer and say, this is what happened in Ontario. This is what happened to the state of finances. What we were left with last year was this notion that there was an accounting dispute. But what people didn't know, and they learned through our committee, is that the Liberal government spent in excess of $2 million on independent auditors and accountants to argue against the very Auditor General's office with 100+ staff, legislative. These are officers of the legislature through the Auditor General's office with the utmost expertise in accounting to be able to create this notion of an accounting dispute. There was no accounting
What are
dispute.
you spending? You know, you've had a commission of inquiry, you've had a review by Ernst & Young, you've had this committee. What is that costing to tell you what you already knew prior to the election? So, you know, I do think that some of what you're saying is actually embedded in Cindy Vino's letter to the committee. You know, for instance, you talk about rate-regulated accounting. Well, the Public Standard Accounting Board actually does not have an opinion on that form of accounting. And it is covered under the current rules. But you're not acknowledging that because you actually haven't called this witness to the committee.
No, that's not fair at all. We actually, we have heard from numerous witnesses through the committee who spoke specifically to that.
Any accountants?
We had the Auditor General, we had the FAO,
Accountants. Have there
we
been
had
any
the Commission of
pension
Inquiry,
accountants?
we had forensic experts in accounting testify. We have heard from countless experts. There was nothing further that Ms. Vino was going to be able to provide that would have added any relevance to that issue.
Sandy Shaw.
I disagree with that entirely. I mean, we can't even predict what it was that Cindy would have brought to the table. The very fact that this was vehemently blocked. You know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And so, you know, we did not have, I mean, she is the internal auditor. She is the public services accountant that was weighing in on this. We may not have agreed with her analysis of the treatment, but we deserve to hear that.
Okay, let me raise another issue here. One of the reasons that this committee's hearings were so intriguing to many is that there were some witnesses that were brought forward who normally are people who stay in the background, who give private advice and hope that private advice stays private. Rob Benzie, let me bring you in on this. The Secretary to Cabinet, the head of the Civil Service, the Deputy Minister of Energy, these are people who normally privately give advice to ministers, and then the ministers go public with what they want. They were brought before the committee, and they were essentially told to testify to what advice they gave to the previous government. And they answered those questions. Anybody you talked to over the course of events who had a problem with that?
I think one of the problems with the committee, Ross is one of the only Tories on the committee, and maybe the only Tory on the committee with any experience at Queen's Park. So the rest are rookies. The NDP, okay, Sandy is a rookie, but the other New Democrats on the committee, John Van Hoff and Catherine Fife, are veterans. I found when Steve Orsini, the Secretary of Cabinet, was testifying, it was almost like he was having to explain to some of the rookies, not Sandy, but some of the Tory rookies, how government actually works, like how the public service gives advice to the elected officials of the day. Like, they go to the minister and they go to the premier of the time and say, here's our best advice, you can take it or you can leave it. And in the case of the Fair Hydro Plan, there were obviously people in the public service who had grave concerns with this, and Premier Wynne at the time decided that this was something they were going to proceed with. Remember, Ontario still has the Fair Hydro Plan. The Tories are just putting it back on the books of the. It's not going to be through OPG's books. It's going to be, and Ross, you could argue, it's proper that it go through the deficit of the books. But we are still paying billions to subsidize the electricity bills of people. Now, the Green Party, I know, campaigned against this. And this is something that you have to think about. I mean, should Ontarians be expected to pay the real cost of electricity? It's politically unpalatable to do that, but this is an artificial thing that this government's doing. It was an artificial thing that the Liberal government's doing. It's giving people money to burn more electricity than they can actually afford.
Ross, I do want to get back to this issue about whether or not public servants are giving their best and most fearless advice to their political masters, because, well, let me just ask the question directly. Are you concerned about forcing public servants to testify at a public committee, knowing that the next government that takes over from you might very well haul those same public servants forward to talk about what private advice they gave your government?
Well, I would say this. First of all, I can understand and I can appreciate how it may have been uncomfortable for some of those public servants to have to come testify before the committee. But I think it's even more uncomfortable that we are now sitting here in Ontario in a government that thought we had a $6.7 billion deficit when in fact we have a $15 billion deficit, and we still have hallway healthcare. We've got crumbling infrastructure.
We have
highest tax
second.
rates.
You say when in fact we have a $15 billion deficit.
That's in
There is considerable disagreement about that. I don't have to
Here
tell
we
you.
go
The
again.
FAO says it's 12.3 billion.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I think the FAO indicated 12.3, but they also said by 2019, if we did not make changes, it would be 15.1. So I'd say they confirmed exactly what we're saying. And the difference there relates to a lot of unfunded promises that the former government made on the eve of an election.
I'm thinking of. I'm just thinking of. I'm thinking of the people watching this right now, and on the one hand, some are saying, "Okay, those mischievous Liberals, they cook things in such a way to understate the deficit." But are they also thinking those mischievous Tories, they are overstating the deficit so that when they clean
exactly
things
what
up,
they're thinking.
they'll look better than they really were?
The financial accountability officer has
don't-
actually said that.
You know,
Exactly.
to the earlier question, here we are now dealing with this deficit. And when you're talking about $15 billion or $12 billion, at the end of the day, it's still virtually 2 times what the Liberals said it was going to be. Like virtually double. So I'm really curious, how do you go from 6.7 to be 12.3 or 15? It's still a very, very dramatic.
Well, you don't
But
count the
those are
pension assets
questions-
for one thing.
But-
That
yeah.
helps you.
but-
That gives you $5 billion right off the
But
bat.
with, sure, but with the size of the deficit, you know, every government will come in and say, "Hey, we got to fix the books; they're in rough shape." This is a different situation, and that was why we were on this committee. That was what we were elected to do.
Those
Sandy
were
Shaw.
not
been
questions
elected
that we got
to find those answers.
Those were not that was not the tone and the tenure of this committee. I mean, I would say that the questions it was more like a criminal trial. I mean, we spent so much time listening to the government side saying, "Who was in the room with you? Whose idea was this? Did Kathleen Wynne tell you to do this?" And I almost think I'm quoting verbatim, which a certain amount of it is this was a political partisan scheme that did inflate the deficit, and that is absolutely wrong. But you know what? Now we have a new government. I would like to say to this government, the campaign is over. Stop vilifying the Liberals, stop sloganeering, and get to some answers.
Do you know what? Apropos of what you just said, should we run this clip now? I'm in the middle of page 4 here. You and the Premier had some fun. You and the former Premier had some fun at this committee. Shall we run this? Sheldon, if you would. Roll tape, as they say.
In terms of these political decisions, which every person in government, and I haven't got to a question, so if I may
No, I
just...
know. Yeah.
I think my first question for you is, in order to get reelected, and you've been through a few reelection processes, would you agree that as a starting point, you have to make sure that the people out there like you, or at a minimum, dislike you less than your opposition? Is that not a fair comment?
Well, Mr. Romano, we already know people didn't like me, so that's not even an issue. So I'm not sure what your question is.
Just that likability is certainly something you have to sort of prioritize going into an election. Is that not a fair comment?
I actually don't understand what this is
Okay,
about.
fair enough, fair enough. And I wasn't,
Sorry,
I'm
Mr.
not
Romano?
trying to be, yeah.
There's a point of order from Ms. Shaw.
I just want some clarity on how this relates to the mandate of the committee, this line of questioning.
Why don't we pick up
for
from your
you,
question
Sandy.
there? What was that all about?
That was further on in the questions. I put an email to the Premier that was written by her Chief of Staff, Andrew Bevan, to the Chief of Staff of the Minister of Energy, Andrew Telzewski. And the email talked about, and I don't want to try to quote this verbatim, but the email referenced how, as an election issue, energy prices were going to be a priority, and we could be seen as solving the energy problem by addressing this. So the question that I then wanted to put to the former Premier, and did in fact put, was that this was all politically motivated, and we had already learned that through the witness, Mr. Telzewski, as well as countless other witnesses.
Looked like you were trying to get her to confirm, though, that she was unpopular. And as she pointed out, she kind of knew that already.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't the ambition at all. And in fact, when she provided the response she did, you'll notice that I very much did not engage on that subject matter and turned more to the overall sort of ambition, the political ambition. But I want to say one thing. While Ms. Shaw makes the comment that, you know, it seemed we were on a different path, there were so many members of the NDP. And I remember Mr. Tabbins actually on the last day before, well, we had Mr. Former Minister of Energy, Mr. Thibeault, on the stand. There were extensive questions that were very similar to what has just been suggested we were after. Because at the end of the day, what we were after was, what was the purpose of concealing the deficit? Why do that? That was really the issue. We were elected to find out what happened with the numbers, to get control of the deficit. This is a very serious issue, and I'm afraid that it gets skirted a little bit too often. Our province is in a horrible financial situation. We heard from the Commission of Inquiry expert panel that we are in a worse position financially today than we were during the 2008 recession. The numbers are staggering. We are approaching a $400 billion deficit.
Debt.
So
Debt.
to
Yeah,
that,
go ahead.
So yes, absolutely. These are serious financial and fiscal implications for Ontario and for the people of Ontario. And so to that end, why have a special committee that spends so much of its time asking questions literally about what was your motivation? Was your motivation, Kathleen Wynne, to get reelected? Like, hello, it's politics. So I don't know that we needed a special committee to get to that. But then why not allow us to ask questions, for example, about the partial privatization of Hydro One? I mean, that was a significant piece of the cost. That was mentioned in the Commission of Inquiry. We were not allowed to call the former CEO, Mayo Schmidt. As we know now, that was the $6 million man, that was possibly the $9 million man. We weren't allowed to call the interim CEO. And in addition, I mean, it's worth noting that subsequent to that, you know, the Hydro One has, a deal has fallen through. The Avista deal has fallen through. It's going to cost I'm not sure the final cost, but significant cost.
It could be $100 million.
Yeah, it's a significant
that.
amount of money. And it's specifically, the regulator in Washington says specifically because of the interference with this government. So my question is, if we want to prevent this kind of manipulation, behind-the-scenes manipulation of any government, why then do we have a special committee that does not allow us to ask significant, important questions? Not
Well, we
literally.
may have an answer. We may have an
Okay.
answer here.
Oh, good. Then
You remember Kevin Flynn?
I do.
Kevin Flynn sat at the cabinet table with you. He was in this studio not too long ago. He asked the same question. Here's the answer he came up with. Sheldon, if you would.
What's particularly galling about this is the use of the Select Committee. And it really, to me, demonstrates how unfit Premier Ford is to be Premier of this province. There's a lack of understanding of what a Select Committee is. You look at the traditions, you go back through the history of that place. And when you form a Select Committee, it's when parties are working together for something that you need to put your membership card to the side for. Mental health and addictions, developmental services, aging, Ontario's role in Confederation, renewable energy.
This
You
is
look
not
at-
that?
This is a witch hunt. This is the Spanish Inquisition. This is Ontario's Inquisition.
That's some pretty tough language, but Mike Schreiner, what do you think about his comments?
Well, I think they're very fair. I mean, this was so politically motivated. And so from my perspective, we have a financial accountability officer. Prior to the election, the financial accountability officer essentially revealed everything that this committee revealed, that the Fair Hydro plan was done off the books, it inflated the deficit, et cetera, et cetera. We've now had a financial accountability officer release a report last week saying that the budget deficit has tripled, and he actually lays the blame at both the Liberal government and the new Conservative government. He said that the Liberals had funding increases that led to tripling of it, and the new Conservative government has had tax decreases, for instance, lowering taxes on the wealthiest 1%, which has helped inflate the deficit. So we have an independent officer of the legislature who's actually shown this. He also, by the way, said that the new government is overstating the budget deficit by at least $1 billion. So now we have a new government playing political games. So maybe we need to have a committee to examine why governments in general play political games with the finances, with the province's finances.
Rob Benzie, what are you hearing from your sources about whether or not this thing is more of a, I think he used the word inquisition, or show trial, as opposed to a genuine fact-finding mission?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that anyone outside of maybe the PC caucus room really thinks of this thing as a serious fact-finding mission. I think voters made their decision about the Liberal government on June 7th. They said it was time to go. Whether the deficit's 6.7 billion or 11 billion or 12.5 or 15 billion, people wanted a new government. They got a new government. And I think what they want now is that new government to start governing. And the campaign has come and the campaign has gone. The Tories won. They deserved to win. They ran the best campaign. And people wanted a Tory majority. They got 76 seats. They now have only 74, but that's another story. But
Want to explain why?
Well, lost one to a sex scandal, one to a defection over the francophone cuts. But I think voters voted and voters decided. I think, but this is not a new thing. When the Liberals took power in 2003 after sweeping away the Tories who had been in power for 9 years before that, they did, they had and looked at the books and found a supposedly hidden $5.4 billion deficit that we all knew about before the election. At that time, we all knew that the books were
That was
in
a
deficit
former
this time.
auditor general, though, that they brought in
Yeah.
to look at the books.
Eric Peters came in as a former auditor.
Nonpartisan thing, if I recall.
It was less partisan than this, but we're maybe more in partisan times than we are now. But I mean, every government does this. Let's say the Green Party is in power in 3.5 years' time, and Premier Mike Schreiner will strike a committee and find, oh my gosh, the deficit is far worse than we thought, and the Ford government did this, that, and the other thing wrong.
Mike Schreiner, will you give us an undertaking right here tonight that if you form a majority government in 3.5 years' time, you will not pull this same?
I am not going to form that committee if I'm premier in 3 years. I will use the financial accountability officer. That's exactly why that position was created, and that's the work that office does.
Okay, let's get to the bottom line, though, of Robert's comments here, which, Ross, are that I think if I heard you right, Rob, you said that only people in the Tory caucus believe that this is a genuine attempt at fact-finding as opposed to a bit of a show trial. Your comments on that?
I have to respectfully disagree with Mr. Benzie. I think
You don't have to respectfully do it if you
well,
don't want to. But
I would expect you to disagree. I would hope you would. They might not let you back in the caucus room if you didn't.
Well, notwithstanding, we'll do it with the greatest
Someone's
respect.
monitor.
I believe that the people of Ontario elected us for a very specific purpose. They elected us because they needed help with the financial situation in this province, and they wanted somebody to take control of it. Our deficit is staggering. We are at the point with a $15 billion, whatever you want. If you want to use the number 12, I'm going to go with 15 and say we overspent as a province in the last year under the former government at the rate of 41 point some million dollars per day. Our deficit is horrendous. Our debt is even worse. We're approaching a $500 billion debt over the course of the next several years. This is something that the people of Ontario wanted to be fixed. They did not want to leave their kids and their grandkids in the situation that we find ourselves in today.
So let's answer this question. Can I ask this question to you, then,
I
Missy
just
Hunter?
want to address this because
You address, then I'll come back.
You're not dealing with the financial situation in this
exactly.
province at all. Like Moody's just downgraded the province's credit rating
Well,
and cited in that downgrade your decisions specifically on reducing revenues. And so here you are, you're saying that you're going to fix it, and it's actually getting worse under your watch.
Well, in fairness,
and I do believe that when you talk about the why and not knowing, who have you been listening to? Because the FAO put out a report in September that actually talked about the concerns around the headwinds ahead of us. And that's the increasing demand on government services in the face of reduced government revenues based on the promises that
But
you
Mitzi,
made.
here's the question for you, which is, did Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals leave the province in such poor fiscal condition, which has opened the door to all of what has subsequently transpired in the last 6 months?
Here's the condition that we left the province, and I think it is important that we remember this. The lowest unemployment rate in 2 decades, the fastest rate of growth in terms of GDP, and the FAO confirmed that in the last 4 years. Outstanding. Job creation last year, 128,000 jobs were created in this province. And so do we have a complex economy and challenges ahead of us? Of course we do.
Well, that's all true what you
Of
said, but
course
it
we
only
do.
tells half the story. You also, after balancing the books, pledged to go back into deficit and have left Ontario with
did.
the largest debt of any subnational
We did,
jurisdiction
and,
in the
and
world.
everyone here has said we ran a campaign on that, and Ontarians said no, right? So that we've accepted that, we're going to move on, but we were committed to those investments, whether it's investments in childcare, in OHIP, on the things that we felt were important to people, like raising the minimum wage, so that we can share the wealth of this province. And this government has actually turned its back on some of the promises that they themselves made to Ontarians.
With just a couple of minutes left here, Sandy Shaw, let me go to you on this. Committee's writing its report right now. Are you involved in that? You're on the committee.
Yeah, we're involved in that.
So you're
yeah,
involved in the
yes.
writing of the report. At some point, it's going to come out, either later this month or next month or something like
Right.
that. Was this useful The whole exercise, was it useful?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think it did underscore, as we said, that the Liberals did leave us in this deficit position that is now going to really begin to impact us. But let me tell you an example of how this committee was a lost opportunity. I mean, we had one of the commissioners was Gordon Campbell, the former premier for BC, who, for example, started the carbon tax in BC, a pioneer in carbon tax. In the commissioner's report, they talked about the impact of the revenue of the cap and trade. They even identified climate change in the near future as going to be a significant impact to the revenues of the province of Ontario. We were not allowed to ask any questions about climate change, despite the fact that we had a preeminent expert on this and that we had identified in the report that the climate change would have significant costs going forward. There's a perfect example of why this committee was really just a narrow-minded partisan exercise and didn't allow us to get into some of the issues going forward that are going to be mostly important to the bottom line of the finances of the province of Ontario. Okay. So on balance, I would say it could have been awesome, but it just wasn't.
It could have been awesome, but it just wasn't.
Yeah, exactly.
Ross Romano, let me give you the last word here as the member of the committee representing the government of Ontario today. It could have been awesome, but it wasn't, is the verdict over here. What do you say?
Well, that's not the sentiments I heard over the course of the committee hearings from Mishar, the other members of the NDP. I think that they were engaged in the process, and I think they participated in the process along with the government. I think that we were able to uncover for the people of Ontario why it was that the deficit is in the situation it is right now. And I think that we satisfied the obligations that we were given by the House, and that we have satisfied a lot of the questions that the people of Ontario had as to how is it that we ended up with a $15 billion deficit? Why are we here right now? What were the reasons? What were the motivations? I believe we uncovered that. And to Ms. Hunter's point from earlier, to refer to the Moody's report, at the end of the day, our government has barely been 6 months since being elected, and we just are having to deal with 15 years of waste and mismanagement that we are having to put on.
You tell us, in fairness, you tell us, when does it become your responsibility?
It is our responsibility today.
Okay.
It is our responsibility today, and I would say that we have been working at lightning speed to try to do everything we can, and that's the most critical thing.
Well,
I think we have been keeping our
promises.
promises.
On the cuts.
We have been keeping our promises.
Because the whole creation of this deficit, and whether it's a dispute over accounting, your acceptance of that, as was stated in your own Commission of Inquiry, on a provisional basis until you decide to change again, is really about covering for cuts. And those cuts, while we're doing this sideshow of a Ford Select Committee, education is being cut by $25 billion. Each board received their individual letter that was carefully thought out by your government to say that we're cutting programs and services.
But let's be honest here. It's 25 million out of 425 million, which is less than 6% reduction. That is a very modest reduction. That is searching for efficiencies, and we're doing that across the board.
The
people of Ontario.
Not by the people who are impacted.
I do look forward to reading the report when it's eventually out. Do you know when it's going to be eventually out?
We can't give you that date. We are meeting tomorrow, and we'll have a better idea at that time.
Okay. In the meantime, we thank you for coming in tonight and helping us out with this.
Sure.
Thanks so much, everybody, and best of the season to you all.
Thank you.
You too.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.